Hello, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome to Rancher's Kubernetes Masterclass today. It is Tuesday, December 15th. Today is our last Kubernetes Masterclass of 2020. So thank you all for joining. We try to hold these 2 to 3 times a month, and we'll plan on continuing to do so in 2021. So make sure you stay up to date with all our classes at rancher.com/events. So while we wait for everybody to get logged in, I'll go through some housekeeping items. Today's topic is on Docker Hub limits, and I will be joined by Matthew Mattox and Fred Richards from the support team. Matt and Fred, you guys there? You want to say hello?
Hello.
Hey, everybody.
Hello, hello. All right, so before I hand it over to Matt to kick off today's topic, I will go through a few housekeeping items. For those of you who have not joined our class before, I'm Connie Lynn here on the left. I'm the manager of global events here at Rancher, now a SUSE company, and I will be your host today. So a quick reminder for our class today. We do plan on going for about 45 to 75 minutes and then followed by Q&A. If you do have a question, please feel free to pop it into your questions tab on your GoToWebinar panel, and we will do our best to answer it throughout the class. And we'll plan to address most of the Q&A after the end of the presentation. If you have not yet, you should head over to slack.rancher.io and join our Kubernetes Masterclass channel, where we can do a live chat with our presenters today and any support staff any questions for today's topic. And with that, I will hand it over to Matt, and we can dive into today's masterclass.
Awesome. Okay, so today we're going to be covering the relatively new Docker Hub limits that were implemented. We're going to cover how do we work around this, some potential workarounds. We're going to cover kind of two open source solutions, and then we're going to finally end it with what's the enterprise or paid solution to solve these problems. And then we're going to close it with Q&A. So if you can go to the next slide. So what are the limits? This is the million-dollar question. These are what Docker Hub has officially posted. From my experience, they're a little loose on these rules, so don't take them as absolute truth, but more of just guidelines. The key thing to remember is Docker Hub is penalizing if you do not authenticate. So if you don't have an account, you are taking a penalty. If you are paying for Docker Hub, you're unlimited. So a lot of these rules just simply don't apply to you at that point. And I think the other big thing to remember is Docker Hub does everything by IP address / username. So especially on-prem environments, and we'll go into this a little bit later, you probably need to be listening to this. So we can go to the next slide. Now, this is just Rancher's official statement. The details behind this I was not privy to, so please don't ask those questions. But long story short, Rancher is exempt from these rules. So if you pull anything from the Rancher organization and Docker Hub, it does not count against your pull limit and simply does not apply to you. But just be aware that it's kind of a special deal that Rancher has. Not all our organizations is that available to. And not all Rancher images come from the Rancher repository. Some come from other third parties. So we just be aware of that. So next slide. So the big thing is what counts as a pull. It's real simple. Anytime the Docker pull command is run. And this kind of trips a lot of people up. That also counts if you're doing a Docker pull and you already have the image. Guess what? It still counts. It's how Docker Hub classifies it is anytime a image request is sent to them, whether you pull down the data or you don't, it's called the manifest pull. That counts. So if you just sit there and do a Docker pull like while true loop of the same image over and over, you do it 100 times, you're going to hit that limit and get blocked. So good. And this also, containerd has the exact same issue as well. It's really just agnostic. It's anytime you do a pull request for an image, it counts. So we can go to the next slide. So the big thing that I tell customers, at least when you're first tackling this problem, is does this apply to you? And one of the big things is monitoring. There's 2 scripts I've had on this, and mind you, all the scripts, all the commands are all shared in the GitHub link associated with these slides, and there's a lot more detail there. But long story short, one of the very first things that I do is I set up this monitoring script, which basically queries an API endpoint inside Docker Hub, and will list what are my current limit and what's currently remaining. As you can see from those examples, in this case, I have 100 and I have 100 remaining. I've seen a lot of people use, this is actually from GitLab, this more advanced script. It's really built around Nagios and a lot of other monitoring tools. So it has the concept of warning and criticals and that kind of cool stuff. So it would be behoovant to go ahead and add that to your monitoring suite to be able to track, and so that you can detect when you're approaching that limit. One of the key things is if you hit that limit, there is no ifs, ands, or buts about it getting around it. You just have to wait out the 6 hours. I've spoken with people at Docker Hub, and they really don't have a way to like flush that limit without you just buying the subscription, which removes the limit. So just be aware of that. Go to the next slide, please. So I really broke this down into kind of 4 main areas. How do we try to mitigate it so we can just stay below the limit? And then the next 2 options are really how do we just simply reduce our number of pulls overall without making too much changes. And then we're going to finally close it with the enterprise solution of how do we really solve this and solve it permanently. So we can go ahead and go to the next slide. So the big one, and there's a lot of stuff in here, but the big one is the image pull policy. By default, Kubernetes has set for security reasons the policy to always, meaning even if I have that image, go ahead and do the equivalent of Docker pull under the covers, which counts. Meaning if I spin up a container and I sit there and just keep spinning it up over and over again, I'm taking pulls away from my limit at that point. It's costing me pull limits, even though I'm not actually downloading anything. So one of the kind of easy solution, and oh shoot, I forgot a script there. I'll fix that before I upload it. Is to simply change that policy. So that policy can be changed to if not present, which says, check and see if I already have that image on the node that I'm requesting. If so, go ahead and just use it and don't do the pull at all. But you need to talk with your security team because that is a security vulnerability. I'm not going to go too deep into it. There's some documentation in the Rancher hardening guideline that dives into why that is a security vulnerability. It's more for public clouds where you have people sharing clusters. So you might be able to just get an exemption, but just be aware that technically it is a security and it will come up on an audit if you do. The other one is monitoring for crash looping. And this is usually when I'm on a Sev1 with a customer, because they've hit their limit, it's because of this. It's somebody deployed a job that they typoed something wrong in the startup, so it's just sitting there constantly crashing, spawning new containers, doing pulls, and constantly just hitting it over and over again. And they, forgot it over on a Friday night, and Monday morning come in and there's 500 pods sitting there chewing up your limit. So again, this goes back to the monitoring of you should be monitoring your environment, looking for non-running pods, especially anything that's crash looping or image backoffs or anything basically loop in the status. The other big one, and this is a tool that I've used, back to the earlier point that if you've paid for Docker Hub, you get unlimited. Um, one of the things you have to do to make that work properly is you have to specify that image pull secret, which tells Kubernetes, hey, when you go to pull this image, here's the credentials to use. That's something you can't today set as a default at the cluster level. You actually have to specify it in your deployments. This tool does a really nice job of basically just putting that secret on all your namespaces by default. It just handles it for you. And then basically what you would do is you create like a service account up in Docker Hub, pay the $60 a year for the account, and then just use that service account across all your clusters and across all your applications. I will note, I have not read the terms of service, and I'm not a lawyer, so please consult with your legal team before doing that. We might be violating the service agreement, so please consult with them. The other one is outbound NATs, and this goes to my earlier point about on-prem customers really are the ones that are going to be impacted. It's a fairly common practice. So let's say I have a 10-node cluster that they all share a common public address that they go out to the internet on. With that being said, I now have a 100 limit against that one IP, meaning that 100 limit's now shared across 10 nodes. So in theory, each node gets 10 pulls before they're all used up. So one of the things that you can work with, and again, you need to work with your networking team on this, is potentially setting up independent or called one-to-one NAT IPs. So each Kubernetes node gets its own public IP address that it goes out to the public internet. So instead of only having a 100 pull limit across my cluster, I now have 10 100 pull limits across my cluster. So in theory, I have 1,000 pull limit across my entire cluster. Again, work with your networking team, and potentially this could also be in the cloud too, depending on how your networking has been set up. So again, work with your networking team on that one. So next slide, please. So this is where we're going to kind of shift gears from just trying to avoid the issue to really trying to solve the issue. The first one that I see a lot of customers kind of use, especially in smaller environments, it's called the pull-through cache. How this acts is it's basically a man-in-the-middle proxy between your Docker and Kubernetes nodes and Docker Hub. So what actually happens is we inject a HTTP proxy into your Docker Hub, your Docker config, so that instead of sending the web request directly out to the internet, it actually forces it to go through this proxy server. And at that proxy server, we have a caching layer. So we're going to go ahead, and the nice thing with this is the one node pulls it down, the next node that comes through, that image is already there and it's done. There is some caveats with manifest pulls that you do have to tweak a few settings. My documentation goes into that a little bit deeper. The advantage is it also saves bandwidth too. So if you go to the next slide. So this goes in more of the pros and cons. The big pro is it's simple. It's like one, if you want to run it standalone, it's one command to run and a few commands to run on your nodes. The big thing is, as far as your apps are concerned, nothing's changed. They still think that they're pulling from Docker Hub. They don't know nor care that we made any difference. They just notice that their image pulls are a lot faster. And as far as ongoing maintenance, as long as the container is running, that's your maintenance end of process. The con, and this is where you need to talk with your security team. Because we are doing a man-in-the-middle attack on your Docker container, basically your Docker engine, this tool allows you to pull not only from Docker Hub, but Google's registry, EKC, and even other private registries. And because we're passing authentication, basically we're terminating authentication, which means anybody that can access that repository on your network now is pulling images as that account. So if let's say you have a super secret image that you're storing in Docker Hub in a private repository, you pull it through that cache, Now anybody that's on your network can also pull from that cache as well and take over that image without authenticating. Currently, this tool has no authentication means whatsoever. It's all public and open. So please make sure your firewall rules are in place and you lock that down as much as possible. The other big thing is one size fits all. This tool that was created, it's very customizable, but it has a lot of limitations, and it's simply for how the product. You can't do things like scanning images or looking for viruses and saying, okay, I only allow these users to pull from Docker Hub, but not these other public images and stuff like that. It's really just a kind of a blank slate on everything. So next slide, please. So the next thing is it's really easy to set up. The prerequisite in standalone mode is Docker and run that Docker run command. Mind you, all these at the bottom of all my slides, I have GitHub links that link to the actual documentation and all the examples. The key thing to remember here is we're exposing this 3128 port. That's our proxy port. And then we're also creating a certificate. And then we have to push that certificate to all the clients because we're going to basically do a man-in-the-middle attack, and we're going to strip off the SSL from Docker Hub. And this is what I was saying earlier about, so GCR is Google's container registry, Qual, Docker Hub, and I believe Amazon's one is in the works too. I think they have an open PR for that. So it's a very nice tool to just kind of put everything in it. But one of the things that I remind people is this tool was built several years ago. It was built mainly to save bandwidth. So there is some caveats that you still can hit the limit with this tool, but just be aware they are directly addressing that in their documentation. They dive into it a little bit more. Next slide, please. So the first one, I hardly ever actually deploy standalone unless it's a lab, because I don't like not having HA, and especially the fact that this is now a dependency in my environment. HA is basically a requirement in every organization. So I've done the hard work for you guys, and I've actually built a set of YAML files that will deploy this as a Kubernetes application and deploys it in a high availability mode with multiple pods, so that even if nodes fail, it's still running. One of the key things to note here is simply the nature of the application. You do need read-write many. In my example, I use Longhorn NFS, which is still a beta product, but there's other products out there and other storage providers that will do it, but just be aware that that is a requirement. And then you also will need an external load balancer as well, so you'll need to work with your networking teams. And the installation guide, it has all the detailed steps for kubectl apply, all the customization that you need to do to make it work in your environment. The other big thing to remember, and this is really kind of across the board, is you have the chicken and an egg problem. If I deploy this on my production cluster, and my production cluster relies on my pull-through cache to come up, what happens if my cluster ever goes down? I can never bring my cluster up because my registry is down. I can't bring my registry up because my cluster's down. So to get out of that issue, what I normally recommend to customers is use an infrastructure cluster. So build a dedicated cluster that's just for these kind of tasks. One second. Sorry about that. That's dedicated for these kind of tasks, that it's intentionally, it doesn't have production workloads on it. It's just for infrastructure. It doesn't have the pull-through cache set up on those nodes, that those nodes just pull from the public internet and call it done at that point. So just be aware of that at that point. I have seen some customers running on their Rancher local cluster. We caution against that because we don't like anything to run on the Rancher local cluster, but just be aware that's an option too. So next slide, please. So the actual, and again, I've done a lot of the hard work. I've scripted this all out. So there is some configuration that you need to do on your Docker engines, so your actual Docker clients, where you basically have to set a couple proxy settings and inject a certificate in there. One of the key things is a Docker reload will not apply these changes. It actually shows up in Docker info, but it doesn't actually take effect. So you do have to recycle the node in order to get it to take the full effect. So a lot of customers will just simply plan a maintenance window and do a rolling recycle of their environment in order to apply the changes. Next slide, please. And almost the exact same steps for K3S. There's just a slightly different script for it. Especially with edge deployments, this can help a lot. We actually see a lot of customers using this not to get around the pull limit, but just simply bandwidth. If you're on a ship in the middle of the ocean, satellite bandwidth is not cheap. So any megabytes that you can save anywhere is a great thing to do. Next slide, please. So the proxy is really kind of the dumb approach, where it's just passing everything through. The private registry is kind of the next step up. I'm going to be in control. I'm going to pull down the images on my laptop, push it to my private repository, and then give that private repository people access to that private repository in my environment. Go to the next slide, please. So the big thing is you might already have one. A lot of organizations already have their own internal private repositories for hosting their own internal images. So a lot of times it's relatively easy to spin up an additional one. Here's my Rancher images, and we actually have scripts in our Rancher documentation that will handle the process of pulling down the images, bundling them up, and then pushing them to your own repository. You have a very tight control because you are the gatekeeper. You're the one choosing what images are allowed to get pulled down and which images are allowed not to be pulled down. The con is the exact same issue. You're responsible for making sure that they need MySQL 5.7.11. If you don't have that image and you haven't pulled it down, they're going to run into issues, and they're going to call you at 2 o'clock in the morning and tell you, hey, I'm missing such and such image. Can you go pull it for me? The default private registry still doesn't have very fine granular controls. It really is kind of a cover all bases. You do have authentication. You can turn that on, but it's kind of just an on and off button. You either have access or you don't have access, and that's it. And you also cannot do like public pulls with no authentication, but only authenticated pushes. It's all or nothing. And the other one is, and this is really for Rancher environments. Currently, Rancher does not support using a global registry, which is basically we changed the default registry on all deployments. That has to be public today, meaning you cannot authenticate against around it. There is some workarounds for that, but they're very unstable, I would say, and fraught with peril. So just be aware that you might actually have to run that with no authentication. So of course, talk with your security team on that one. So next slide, please. So standalone, again, it's very simple. The big thing that I want to point out is Docker in particular respects certificates. So you do have to run a valid certificate. A lot of times when I'm hopping on a call with a customer, one of the very first things we run into is they're using like a self-signed certificate, and Docker doesn't trust that by default. And there's ways to work around that to force it to go ahead and trust it and ignore the certificates, but you're gonna be fighting an uphill battle. It's much better to just go ahead and get a valid certificate, whether that's a public, DigiCert, whatever authority you want to pick, or even an internally signed certificate, that's fine. The key thing to remember there is your Linux box have to trust that certificate. So make sure that you've gone in and injected that root CA for your own private registry, private authority into your cert chain at that point. So go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And again, I've done the hard work. I actually give you 2 flavors to run the default registry as a Kubernetes service. Read write once, so it'll run a single pod. This is more the classic traditional block storage if you're using Longhorn or you're using VMware Entry or whatever other provider you're using, it just simply just runs one pod, and then we have a load balancer that sits in front of it. And I also provided for people that have the ability in their environment with read write many. You can run that in HA mode with multiple pods. They just have to have a common volume behind it. And again, my note on the infrastructure cluster, don't get into a chicken and the egg thing of how do I pull in images. Another classic one that I see some customers do is if they have 2 sites, they have an infrastructure cluster for each site, and the infrastructure cluster relies on the other site's infrastructure cluster. So as long as both sites aren't down, you could bring one up and start bootstrapping everything. So that is kind of a clever trick, but in reality, I really like to build a tiny 3-node cluster to just be off on an island by itself to do this. And again, the scripts are all located right there. Next slide, please. Okay, and as far as the nice thing about the Docker registry, we're using it as intended. So you really just need to do Docker login end of process. You still have to inject the secrets into your deployments. And Rancher also has some additional documentation for how do you get Archie and Rancher to do the initial pulls using your private registry, but that's all in our air gap documentation. So go ahead and next slide, please. And then, so as far as Kubernetes goes, one of the big things is back to my earlier point about the image pull secrets. If you're pulling from an authenticated repository, you have to pass it in as your deployment. One of the nice things is that config.json that could have 5 or 6 repositories. So some organizations will have like a public one and then a private one and then maybe even an application one, and you can merge them all into one nice big secret and then just append a common name to your deployment and just call it done. The other thing is your image tag does need to be updated. So in this case, if I just specified, MySQL, v5.7, Kubernetes and Docker and all that are going to assume that I mean to pull from Docker Hub. I have to explicitly tell it, pull from, Matt's awesome registry / MySQL / MySQL server, blah, 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 blah. That is kind of a gotcha with especially like public charts, a lot of public documentation. A lot of people don't specify that and they just assume the defaults. So that can kind of trip you up. So just be aware that you might have to go out there and modify those. And of course, the Kubernetes documentation's there. So next slide, please. And then of course, K3S, we actually have a whole doc that covers this. It's effectively the same. You just write it to a config file, then restart K3S, and it's end of process at that point. So next slide, please. So this is where, and I'm not going to go too much detail into these because these really deserve their own class talk. A lot of enterprise scale for Kubernetes, they really don't use options. They really just kind of use either Harbor or, and the next one will be JFrog. I like Harbor for the simple fact that it's it's open source, it's free. It's a lot like Rancher, so I like to support organizations that also do that as well. Mind you, these are my own opinions. These are not Rancher's opinion. I believe they're a partner, but don't quote me on that. The big advantage to Harbor is in JFrog as well, is the granularity. I can set up really cool rules like, hey, you're allowed to pull from these users in Docker Hub. So I can pull from Rancher, I can pull from the MySQL guys, I can pull from the Nginx guys. But if it's not on that white list, I can't pull from totally not a Russian hacker, totally legit image, repository. and be aware that we have seen that. There is a lot of very smart people with ill intent that are making really good images that do really cool things that deploy applications, but are injecting very malicious things into said images. And there's really no way Docker Hub really knows that they're doing something inappropriate with those containers. So just be aware that you might want to use a lot of those enterprise features. Like I know Harbor has a whole image scan tool where it'll block images if it violates a certain number of severity bugs. And I believe there's a paid version. Don't quote me on that. But if you're really wanting the fine granular control and a lot of the really advanced features, you really need to look at a product. If you can go to the next slide as well. So this is JFrog Artifactory. Harbor and JFrog are the two most common ones, at least what we see in the environment. They're kind of the two big players in the space. JFrog, we see a lot of people have JFrog because they also have it for other things as well. And we actually did a Kubernetes master's class on that, so I'm not going to go too deep in. But they have a lot of the same rules of being able to whitelist certain users, having certain rules around it where you can, this person can pull this image, but this person can't. This team can pull for just this one area, and really fine tune all those rules. And they have HA built into them. I believe both products can be deployed on Kubernetes as well. Some organizations actually like to leave it standalone for the simple fact of chicken and egg. So just be aware of that. And then I think that's it. I think the next slide's, yeah, Q&A. So I'm open up to questions if anybody has any.
Yeah, I don't currently see any questions, but we'll give people some time to pop it into the tab here.
I do see a question about the slides available. So they will be available on the GitHub link. And then also, I believe we send them out within like the next day or two in an email as well.
Yeah, correct, in a follow-up email. All right, so it looks like we have a question here. Will Docker and Docker builds on GitLab runners and Kubernetes pull from the Docker config on the node?
I don't believe so. Better answer that question. I have not tested that. I know, like if you're using Docker Hub's pipeline inside them, it doesn't count because it's all inside their network. I believe the reason that they did most of this was bandwidth costs were just becoming too much. So that hence the reason that they implied these limits, impose these limits, simply to reduce their overall bandwidth. So if it's staying inside their network, they don't really care. But as far as like on-prem pipeline builds, I do know one of the key things with the pull-through cache is you cannot push through it. So if let's say you've configured it on your laptop, you can pull images all day, every day. But as soon as you go to push, it has no idea what to do with a put request. So that is one limitation. It usually doesn't apply to most pipeline builds because you're running, Docker and Docker or something to that effect where you're not actually using the Docker engine on the host itself. That is one other thing I know. GitLab does that. For GitLab's runner, they run Docker and Docker, so they don't know or see any of the configurations of the cover, so you might have to modify that runner to fully support that.
We did have a couple other questions about Harbor and JFrog, if they can act as pull-through proxies as well.
Yes. So I know Harbor for a fact will do that. It's less of a pull-through proxy and a more of it has this concept of syncing. So what you do is, and I'm gonna pick on Rancher. So you say, Harbor for this Docker Hub for the Rancher repository, go ahead and sync that repository to me. So go ahead and basically do the equivalent of a Docker pull on all of those images and pull them down and make a local copy. So I have a one-to-one mirror. I do not believe it does on the fly pull through cache. It's a great question for them. I'll have to get back to you on that one though. But I know, I believe JFrog does do it on the fly, pull through cache.
Another question was, so do Harbor and JFrog, are they image registries for on-prem? I guess the question would be, you know, they're not only on-prem, could they be in the cloud too?
Yeah, yes. So, and again, I'm a Rancher employee. I'm not paid by JFrog or Harbor. They're just cool products. I believe they have SaaS offerings. So if you just want to use it up in the cloud, great. We have a number of customers that are running on-prem. Some of them will have, like JFrog has a replication feature in it, so you could have your registry on-prem, but replicate it also to the cloud for DR and stuff like that. So they have some really advanced features with that. Again, it's one of the reasons I see a lot of organizations, unless you're just a really tiny, you know, oh, I only need to do this one thing and that's it. A lot of organizations just switch over to the enterprise solution and call it done because they want the extra features.
Another good question, how can we set the repository at the cluster level in Rancher?
So Rancher has this concept of the default registry, and it's defined. Well, let me back up. So Rancher actually has what we call the global default, and you can set that inside global settings, and then it's like system default registry. The key thing there is if you set it there, basically what that does is it says, unless I specify the fully qualified image path, so you know, io.docker, I forget what the actual one is, /image/tag. Unless I specify that, if I just give the short version of the name, go ahead and append whatever registry I set as my global one in there. The problem with that is today, that has to be an unauthenticated registry, meaning that anybody can pull from it. I believe that's being worked on, but don't quote me on that. And then if you just want to set it at a cluster level, so in the Rancher UI, there is an option. It's like towards the bottom. It's just like system registry or something like that. And that will tell RKE, which is the Rancher Kubernetes engine, here's your private authority, and here's your credentials. Go forth, be fruitful at that point. So that's what I see most people. And then there was also that script that I had. It was like Alex, I think, has made it, where he's written a controller to go ahead and inject that. That's more for application. The key thing as far as documentation is Rancher calls these kind of clusters and this kind of setup an air gap setup, because that's traditionally how this was. The reason this was done was, you know, 3-letter acronym organizations cannot pull from the public internet, so how do you get images? So the nice thing is air gap kind of nicely ties in and solves the same, it solves a different problem, but does it in the same way. Do we have any more questions?
I think that's about it. We had a couple folks thanking us today for the scripts and whatnot.
And normally after the call for the next couple of days, I try to stay on top of the Slack channel for our master's class. So if you think of a question as soon as you get off the call, please feel free to go ahead and drop it in there, and just at Matt Mattox and say, hey man, I got a question. Not a problem.
Don't see any additional questions coming in. Richard said, welcome to the SUSE family. Thank you. We are very excited to have joined SUSE. So thank you again, Matt and Fred, for a great presentation, and for everybody for attending today. And I just have a few notes to wrap this up before we end here. As Matt mentioned, all of our products and projects are open source, so you can head over to rancher.com to check them all out. We do have another event tomorrow. It's our December online meetup, taking place at 1 p.m. Eastern. And we'll be talking about our new project Harvester. So if you are interested in that, go ahead and head over to rancher.com/events to sign up. And if today's topic was a little bit over your head, we do have an intro training that we offer. I believe it's weekly. You can find that at rancher.com/training. Or if you think you know everything about Rancher, you can get certified to become a Rancher operator. And you can do that by going to academy.rancher.com. And with that, thank you guys again for a great presentation today. Thank you everybody for attending. Hope everybody has a great and safe holiday, and we will all talk soon. Thank you.